PlayStation TV, PS Vita TV. When Sony released the PlayStation TV, known in Japan as the PS Vita TV, it seemed like a clever expansion of the Vita ecosystem. The idea was simple: a tiny box that plugs into your television and lets you play PS Vita games using a DualShock controller. On paper, it had the potential to become a budget-friendly micro console that offered handheld games on the big screen. But in execution, it became one of Sony's most misunderstood and unsupported platforms ever. Marketing didn't help either. Stores often didn't know how to position the device. Was it a streaming box, a Vita replacement, a PS Now device, a tiny console? Even Sony seemed confused about what the PS TV was supposed to be. As a result, it received very little promotion and almost no long-term support. Sony discontinued it quietly and today rarely acknowledges it. For a device that came from the PlayStation brand, the PS TV remains one of Sony's biggest misfires. PSP Go. The PSP Go was Sony's bold but disastrous attempt to push the gaming world into a digital-only future. Released in 2009, it eliminated the UMD disk drive and required players to purchase everything digitally. This was long before most gamers accepted all digital gaming, and the result was an immediate rejection from the audience that Sony most relied on: PSP fans. Even worse, retailers saw the PSP Go as a threat. Physical game sales were a major portion of their business. So many stores refused to promote it or even stock it aggressively. With no marketing push, a higher price tag, and no ability to use existing games, the PSP Go collapsed almost instantly. Sony tried to defend it, but within a year they quietly shifted their attention elsewhere. Today, it is widely considered one of the most unnecessary pieces of hardware in PlayStation history. PSX Digital Video Recorder Console. The PSX is one of Sony's strangest and most obscure experiments. Released only in Japan, the PSX was essentially a PlayStation 2 fused with a high-end digital video recorder. It was meant to be a luxury multimedia hub for the living room, combining gaming, media recording, and stylish hardware into one device. But the idea turned out to be far more ambitious than the reality. Sony hoped the PSX would be a revolutionary entertainment hub, but instead it became a pricey curiosity that barely made a ripple. Production ended within 2 years, and Sony never attempted another hybrid console DVR again. The PSX became a lesson in over-engineering and misunderstanding what gamers actually wanted. PlayStation Vita. The PlayStation Vita is often regarded by gamers as one of the most underrated handhelds ever made. It was powerful, elegant, and capable of running console-quality games on the go. Yet despite its incredible hardware, it is also one of Sony's biggest disappointments, and a console they quietly gave up on far earlier than fans expected. Sony's lack of first-party support eventually doomed the system. After a few years, major Sony studios stopped developing games for the Vita entirely, leaving indie developers as the primary content source. As talented as those creators were, indie games weren't enough to keep the Vita alive. Sony slowly phased it out, discontinuing cartridges, shutting down apps, and eventually ending production. The Vita deserved much more, but Sony's lack of commitment ensured its failure. For many fans, this remains the console Sony regrets abandoning more than anything else. PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3 wasn't a commercial flop. By the end of its lifespan, it sold tens of millions of units. But the early years were such a nightmare for Sony that many within the company have publicly admitted it was one of their hardest periods. Sony went into the PS3 generation riding the incredible success of the PlayStation 2, assuming they could charge anything they wanted and gamers would still buy it. Sony had to spend years crawling out of the hole created by the launch. Over time, the PS3 added more games, better models, and a more reasonable price point. It eventually recovered, but that recovery required massive financial losses and a complete restructuring of Sony's gaming division. In hindsight, Sony likely regrets how the PS3 launched, even if its late success softened the blow. PSP Street E1000. The PSP Street, or PSP E1000, was Sony's attempt to create a budget version of the PlayStation Portable late in its life cycle. But its stripped-down features made it feel like a downgrade that nobody asked for. It removed Wi-Fi entirely, eliminating online play, digital downloads, and any form of connectivity. The speakers were downgraded, the build quality was reduced, and several features present in earlier PSP models were simply removed. While the price was lower, the compromises were so severe that the console appealed to almost no one. Gamers who cared about features avoided it entirely, and casual buyers didn't see enough value compared to the thriving Nintendo handhelds at the time. The PSP Street barely made an impact and is rarely discussed today outside of hardware collectors. For Sony, it was a reminder that cost-cutting doesn't always produce meaningful results. PlayStation Classic. The PlayStation Classic had the potential to be a nostalgic hit, following the massive success of Nintendo's NES and SNES classic systems. But instead of a celebration of PlayStation history, it became a rushed and sloppy product that disappointed nearly everyone. The game lineup was baffling. Many iconic PlayStation titles were missing, while several included games weren't fan favorites. Even worse, Sony used PAL versions of multiple games, leading to slow frame rates and poor performance. Fans immediately noticed the lack of analog sticks on the controllers, which limited the type of games that could be included. The emulation quality was inconsistent and in many cases subpar. Within weeks, the system dropped heavily in price as retailers struggled to sell it. The PlayStation Classic became a symbol of Sony trying to cash in on nostalgia without putting in the care or respect the brand deserved. Today, it remains one of Sony's most widely criticized hardware releases. PlayStation Portable. Although the PSP overall was successful, its early models caused so many headaches for Sony that the company spent years repairing the damage. The PSP 1000 had widespread issues with dead pixels, weak build quality, and a disk system that famously caused UMD explosions, where discs would pop out if the system was dropped or mishandled. Sony faced lawsuits, returns, and a flood of early complaints. The UMD movie format also became a commercial failure. Sony hoped to create a new way for people to watch films, but consumers rejected the idea of buying a movie that could only be played on one device. The combination of hardware flaws, poorly received features, and questionable design choices made the early PSP era a challenging time for Sony, even though later revisions greatly improved the system. And that wraps up every console Sony likely regrets making. If you enjoyed this deep dive into PlayStation history, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future gaming breakdowns just like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.